Hello and welcome to the third part in this course on Excel for complete beginners. In this part, we will finish taking a look at the sum function, and then I will introduce you to the count and if functions. And by the end of this part, you will have a good knowledge of a few of the basic functions which you can have a practice at yourself in Excel. Let's get started. Down here we have 1, 2 and 3, and we also have A, B and C. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the sum of 1, 2 and 3. And we can do that, if we remember at the end of our last part, we can do that by typing in equals and then sum and then open brackets, then making our selection and closing brackets and then pressing enter, and we get the sum of 6. That's because 1 add 2 is 3, and then add 3 is 6. Now, sum only works with values. It does not work with texts. That's because texts themselves has no value associated with them. And I can prove this to you by taking or attempting to take the sum of A, B, and C. So let's do that. And notice we get 0. That's because these texts have no value associated with them. So it's not recommended to use sum of texts. Moving on to count. So let's now take the count of 1, 2 and 3. If we type in equals and count and then open brackets, then we can take the selection, close brackets, and we get the count being 3. That's because we made the selection of 3 cells. So the count there is 3. Notice that this is different to the sum. That's because the sum is adding up all those values, whereas the count is just saying we selected 3 cells that we want to take the value of. Count also works with text. However, this is one of those cases where you have to use another item in the drop-down. So this count only works with numbers. But if you type in count A, that's the count that will work with text. So count A, open brackets, and then you make your selection, close brackets, and then press enter, you will get 3. But if you did the normal count, get rid of that by pressing delete, equals count and make the selection, that count will not work. So remember, for text it's count A, for numbers it's just count. Equals count A, open brackets, make your selection, close brackets and enter. Let's now take a look at the if function. If functions work by making a condition, and then if that condition is met, you have a true value that's pulled, and if that condition is not met, you have a false value that is pulled. So if we type in equals and then if, and then you open brackets, you'll see at the bottom it has 3 sections to it. It has if, logical test, value if true, value if false. And this logical test could be anything. So let's say if this cell, we make our selection of a cell, this cell here, equals 1, and then we put a comma, value if true. Let's say if it's true, we go 1, and if it's false, we go 0. And then we close our brackets. And press enter, the value returned is 1. That's because this value is 1, so it returned the true value. Notice also that when you create a function, when you type in a function, let's say sum, and then you open brackets, you get this sort of helpful I don't know, tip box, whatever you want to call it, below it. This is really useful when you're trying to get to grips with new functions, because you can do that with any function. Count, open brackets, and you get a sort of helpful box here. And if, slightly more complex, open brackets, and you get a helpful box here. So let's do another if statement. Let's actually move it up here and type in if this equals A. Now, because A is text, A has to go in quotation marks. All text in functions have to go in quotation marks. So if E11 is A, and the A is text, so it has to be in quotation marks, the value, if true, then let's do another text, it's say true, and the value if false, let's say is, well, let's change that. Let's say yes, and the value if false is no, and then we close brackets, and then we hit on it. We say it's no, because that value is B and not A. And we can always change that around to say B, and it's yes. And notice the text jumps onto the left side of the cell, and the number jumps to the right side of the cell. You can really see it clearly here. This is a number, so it's on the right side. This is text, so it's on the left side. So that's it for this part. I hope you've enjoyed that sort of brief introduction to a few of the basic functions. In the next part, I'll introduce you to a couple more functions, and maybe even I'll show you a bit on formatting as well. But we'll see how we get along. Thanks very much for watching.